Welcome to the Rise of Cryptocurrencies show. Today I'm with Jordan Freed. He is the VP of Development at Hedera, HashGraph.com. Lots of talk about this company, and I'm glad that he took the time and he's with us to share many exciting, controversial things about what's going on right now in the cryptocurrency space and the blockchain technology versus HashGraph and where this entire sector and this entire economy is going. So I'm very excited about this interview. Jordan, how are you today?
I'm very good, Lior. Thanks for having me.
Hey, I want to start with a very basic question for people who already know this or maybe they've never heard of HashGraph. What is it?
Yeah, it's a great question. HashGraph, first off, is not blockchain. HashGraph really is the continuation of where the idea of blockchain begins, which is distributed trust. HashGraph is a fourth generation blockchain-like technology that's literally a directed acyclic graph. It's mathematically proven. It's this simple and elegant algorithm that was invented by a guy named Dr. Lehman Baird back in 2012 leading up to 2015. And it's not theoretical. I think that's a big point. It's mathematically proven to help you replicate information like wildfire across many databases. So it does everything that blockchain does, but just a whole lot better and even more that blockchain's not capable of doing today. So that's HashGraph in short.
Now, is it already implemented by anyone?
Yes. So we actually have customers through our company, Swirlds. So Swirlds is a company that was incorporated back in 2015 that patented HashGraph. We could talk about the patents and why we patented the technology, because I think that's an important point. But our go-to-market strategy has been to gain enterprise adoption. We didn't just publish a white paper and raise a whole bunch of money without having any technology. So we have this SDK. You can actually go get it at swirlds.com/download and download this SDK, upload it, and play with some of our demo apps. You can, we have a cryptocurrency demo application in there. We have a stock market demo application in there, even a game, how you would build a game on HashGraph. So all of that's there. And so that's Swirlds. Our customers, the biggest customer I'll talk about is the credit unions, CU Ledger, the credit union industry here in North America. They serve 6,000, the industry, which is 6,000 members, 105 million members. They're using HashGraph as the foundation or this trust layer for all the credit unions that are part of CU Ledger, part of this credit union service group. So that's the first big customer. We have lots of other customers like Intiva Health that are building medical credential management applications. They're based out of Austin, Texas. We have a great customer over in Ireland that I'll be with in the month of April, speaking at the Dublin Tech Summit with, called Mingo, which is building a chat messaging application using HashGraph. We have a customer with Guns N' Roses. Matt Sorum, lead percussionist of Guns N' Roses, is using HashGraph to build what he sees as the future of how artists will be compensated for their masterpieces. So it combines gamification, augmented reality, and HashGraph to reverse the incentives, let's say, for artists, where right now there's a lot of middlemen that get compensated before an artist really gets paid for his or her work. So those are just some of the customers. There's many more, but those are the ones we talk about publicly today. Now by the way, everything I mentioned to you, Lior, that's our private business. That's Swirlds. So that's the go-to-market strategy there. What's interesting to point out is when we talk about HashGraph, there's really two separate companies. The other is Hedera HashGraph, which you mentioned at the beginning of the show. Hedera HashGraph, that's our public net. That's our main net, the one where anyone can build on top of without even having to talk to us.
Interesting. So let's talk about the patent. What's the idea behind it? And obviously, this is taking the world of crypto into a different direction. We've seen obviously many other blockchains that are not patented, and you're going with the route that's very commercial. Can we talk about why you decided to do that, and what's the next steps then for Hedera?
Yeah, I'm really glad we're touching on this, because this is, I think a lot of people are black and white when it comes to open source, closed source, or just the patent issue. Obviously, there's a lot of thoughts around what the ethos of the space is. And I'll speak personally to say that I fundamentally believe in open source technology. And if you talk to Mance Harmon, our CEO, or Dr. Lehman Baird, our co-founder and the inventor, they will also say wonderful things about open source communities. Open source gives you, Lior, and me, and the entire community the incentive to contribute our best source code to the project so everyone benefits. But as it turns out, when you combine open source technology, open source code with a cryptocurrency, the economic incentives are turned on their head. And all of a sudden, me and you and three of our developer buddies can get very political, bind together and fork the main chain, fork the community that we're part of. And this is creating chaos in the marketplace. Today, we've seen more than, I'm losing count. I think it's 7 or 8 different versions of Bitcoin today. I just read that Pablo Escobar's brother, paternal brother, is creating his own version of Bitcoin called Diet Bitcoin. And you can't make that sort of thing up. So the inability to protect the code base from forking can directly be attributed to it being open source, to it being no one can control it, and it just takes on this life of its own. And while that's normally great in other communities, when you have a cryptocurrency attached to it, it just creates this distrust in the marketplace. So what do we really like about open source then? I think is the next question. What are the best fundamental aspects of open source, and how can we ensure that they continue to exist and that we have all these features while preventing the platform, this platform that we're trusting, this platform that we're asking mission critical organizations to develop on top of, this platform that you may be asking your grandma or your mother to store her personal wealth on top of. How do you ensure that this platform gains mainstream adoption and gains the trust? And I think you do that by having transparency of the code base, so everyone can see every aspect of it, which is what we're doing, complete transparency of the code base. And all the code you write on top of the Hedera is your code. You own it. You can do whatever you'd like with it. You're just making API calls to our platform, to the network, but it's still your code. You don't even have to talk to us. There's no license required. Anyone can use the code. If you want to deploy HashGraph in a public network, that's great because we have a business to support you in doing that called Swirls. So this way we get the best aspects of an open source community. We get a lot of eyeballs in the code. We have code bounties where people can help find bugs in the code, and we'll pay them. We do hackathons. We've already done some, and we have a big schedule of hackathons throughout the spring and summer. So we'll have a lot of eyeballs on our code. We already do. We're just not open source. And I guarantee everyone listening to this, Lior, that Hedera will not fork. We will never fork. That's the guarantee. And that's how we believe you're going to get mainstream adoption. Now, I'm well aware that what I just said would get me booed at a local blockchain meetup. But when you're talking about mainstream adoption, I think that we have to start thinking in much broader terms. How do we get the whole world to come onto public networks? And I think it really starts with, one, the proper technical controls and legal controls, but also governance, which Hedera addresses as well.
Okay, so you already touched upon this. Let's recap this in a very specific way. What is the difference between HashGraph and blockchain?
Yeah, so HashGraph is literally not blockchain, right? So blockchain is literally a chain of blocks. HashGraph is a DLT. It's a distributed ledger technology. Blockchain has a lot of limitations, and I want to just go there for a second. Right now, the popular blockchain, at least in the public network side, we're thinking, when you think of it, you're probably thinking proof of work. You're thinking low throughput, not very scalable. It's also not fair. You're waiting for a miner to win the right to add this block to the chain. You're trusting that miner to set a fair order of transactions, which we can't trust. It's not a fair order of transactions. The miner can put his or her transactions before anyone else's and before they add this block to the chain. So what HashGraph is again, this simple, elegant algorithm that takes that you can think of like a data structure. We call it a DAG, a directed acyclic graph. but it's our own DAG. It's our own consensus protocol. It includes gossip about gossip, but it's a fundamental breakthrough, Lior, that's based on 30-year-old academic research around this category of algorithms called pure voting-based systems. Dr. Baird's breakthrough was when he figured out that you could take a pure voting-based system, which has never been deployed because of their unrealistic bandwidth requirements. His breakthrough was when he realized he could add 2 small bytes of information to every event in a pure voting-based algorithm and create this data structure called the hash graph. Literally, it's a graph of cryptographic hashes, hence the name, where you know who's talked to who and when. So if you have Alice, Bob, Carol, and Dave, Alice would never have to ask Carol, Dave, or Bob what their votes would be because Alice already knows, because she knows the 2 data points of 1, who Alice last talked to, and 2, the last transaction, the last digital signature that Alice has in her local database. And by having these 2 bytes of information, literally 2 bytes of information, we're able to achieve the very best throughput possible in the space. We do 500,000 transactions per second in a single shard. You're not going to do better than that in a single shard. This is not Plasma or Lightning. This isn't some sidechain scaling solution. So the throughput is what you get there. You also get this 30-year-old definition of asynchronous Byzantine fault tolerance. You get this best security possible in a distributed network. And I want to, this is a really important point, Lior. It's not ABFT probable. It's not like ABFT another word after, right? A lot of people in this space are making up new terms to essentially compromise some aspect of security or assume that some genre of attack doesn't exist. HashGraph doesn't do that. HashGraph is asynchronous Byzantine fault tolerant by the 30-year-old definition of what it means to be ABFT. And I think that's big. So to sum up all of that, it's fast, it's fair, and that we have a fair, provable, fair definition of fairness in a fair order of transactions. We can touch on why that's important later, but fast, fair, secure, that's HashGraph.
And now, Jordan, for people who do not understand the technology behind this, in terms of the equipment and hardware that this requires, is this the same as blockchain technology where you need miners and you need large facilities? How does this work in terms of the hardware behind this algorithm?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that. Proof of work, existing blockchain technology is incredibly inefficient. In fact, it's a massive drain on electricity and quite wasteful when it comes to the hardware that it uses to solve these complex mathematical problems to win this right to add a new block to the chain. HashGraph is not that. In fact, HashGraph, our testing, is done on a Raspberry Pi device. So we have this rack of Raspberry Pis that we test on. So if you're not familiar with the Raspberry Pi, it's this very low compute device with very small chips in it. It's about the size of a cell phone. And we do our testing on those devices. At scale, you would want a faster GPU. We actually do all of our digital signature verification on a GPU. In private testing, we've been using the V100. It's a very expensive card, but we've been able to achieve 1.18 million digital signatures per second on a GPU. You'd be able to use a much cheaper GPU, though, a 1080 Ti. You'd be able to use, which is only a $600 card. This is what you probably see lots of Ethereum miners using today. And yes, in HashGraph, there is an economic incentive to come and join the network, lend the bandwidth, the CPU cycles, and the storage of your computer to the network so that you can earn money. And we do anticipate that being quite an attractive proposition. At full scale, Lior, we intend to have millions of people gossiping about gossip, participating in consensus, and getting paid to do so on HashGraph. It's a lot more efficient in terms of the environment. We're not a drain on electricity like a lot of these other networks are, and it will be far more accessible to those that have, let's say, less expensive hardware.
Jordan, what are the weaknesses of HashGraph? What will the competitors' first thing be in order to try and and say, hey, you need to look at this, this, and this before you get all excited about HashGraph?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that the weakness right now is that first, and I'll tell you why. I'll get to some real weaknesses, but I'd say the first is there's a lot of misinformation out there, and there's an economic incentive to spread misinformation. We're talking about cryptocurrency markets today. In the middle of April, we're looking at there's probably a quarter trillion dollars, of market value stored in at least the public crypto markets. So. It's a shame because a lot of this stuff just isn't true. But the truth is that we are a new code base. When you're looking at the HashGraph code base, you've got to learn this new code base. We have our own development framework. It is in Java. If you're a decent Java developer, it'll take you 24 hours to learn how to build your first demo application on HashGraph. But I'd say the disadvantage is it's just a new code base. We're the new kids on the block. We have a lot to prove. We make bold claims. I think all the claims we can back up with data and by showing third parties that they can replicate our results. You can actually take our SDK right now. You can download it, put it up on AWS, Amazon Web Services, and replicate all of our speed test claims and test it out yourself. So I welcome anyone listening to go ahead and do that and to ignore the misinformation out there. But I'd say that we need to do a lot better of a job communicating the key aspects of what we're doing. And while the tech, frankly, I think the tech speaks for itself. And I think 10 years from now, hopefully sooner, many in the space will look back and say, wow, that was a fundamental breakthrough and still is a fundamental breakthrough in computer science. So much so that Dr. Baird, our founder, should win the Turing Award for this particular breakthrough. Now, those are my words, not his. Dr. Baird's much more humble than to say something like that. But what we have on our hands here is this breakthrough. We need to do a better job communicating its use cases and the applications of it in the marketplace, which we're in the process of doing today.
Okay, let's divert off the topic real quick and just talk about what's the difference between centralized and decentralized blockchain technology, and how does HashGraph come into this debate?
Yeah, so so when we talk about distributed ledger technology, everything in HashGraph is and everything in the marketplace, the idea is that we all are participants in these distributed systems. HashGraph is not a centralized system. What we do and what we have on our hands is we have the ability to create distributed consensus at scale. And when I mean scale, Lior, the vision is to have millions of nodes on the network, full open consensus. So as to answer your question as it relates to HashGraph, our vision is that everyone has this opportunity to join the network and participate in consensus. So we are purely open consensus. We have what we call permission governance. So what we realize in this space is that you don't have great governance. You have benevolent dictators of other protocols. And most people listening that are familiar with crypto will know who I'm talking about. And you have bicameral governance at the big one, at Bitcoin, where this has led to some big problems. This has led to politics. This has led to social community issues on when do we update the code base? And if we don't all agree, then there's a fork of the chain. These are governance problems. So when I talk about governance, I'm talking about the legal and technical controls needed to create a platform that's capable of gaining mainstream adoption, something that enterprises and individuals will trust to store their personal net value and to build on top of. So we have this permission governance council, which we call Hedera, the HashGraph Council, that makes decisions much like Janet Yellen or a central banker or the chair of the Fed would. They decide on technical things like what's the technical roadmap, when are new features being added to the platform, when do we upgrade our wallets, things like that. They also help decide on things like economics and monetary policy, when are transaction fees increased, or when do we increase the amount of money someone earns for lending their CPUs, bandwidth, and storage to the network. So that is when someone says permissioned or centralized, I would say there is our governance body that is still distributed. They're geo-distributed across the globe. They're distributed across industry sectors. And I would argue it's very unlikely for an Australian consultancy group to collude with a German or European. But I would still argue that's not centralized. So I throw that out there. Now, what I really think people are getting at when they talk about centralized versus decentralized is leaders. And I consider a leader, Lior, to be any computer in the system that sets total order of transactions. HashGraph doesn't have any technical leader or centralized vulnerabilities like that. HashGraph doesn't have the leader that sets the total order of transactions that can be DDoSed. Leaders are very vulnerable to their members because all the members must know the IP address of the leader. And even if it's a round robin where the leader is rotated, any member can disclose the IP address of the leader and direct what's called a directed denial of service attack or DDoS attack and take the leader down, thus taking the entire network down. HashGraph has no technical centralization at all when it comes to that.
Jordan, for people who understood less than 1% of everything we have just discussed in this interview and are not techie, they're either investors and are looking to capitalize, or they're just interested in future technologies and how the world is going to shape up. In 2 to 3 years, when the company continues and grows and gains market attention, what are the use cases for HashGraph? What would this be used? Where will the person living in the Western world or in third world countries, where will he see HashGraph behind the scenes and say, okay, that's something that's working on the HashGraph, for example?
Yeah, that's great. The connection got a little bad for a second there, but I think I understood the question. In 2 or 3 years, I think you're going to see, I have this vision that we're in this hockey stick moment in time in terms of technical innovation. And as it relates to distributed ledger technology, I think things are about to get very exciting, and they already are. I see mission critical organizations like Red Cross, like the NYPD, New York Police Department, or Scotland Yard, or non-governmental organizations like NGOs that are trying to solve social good problems in Africa or in low income areas of Southeast Asia. I see them coming onto and building distributed applications on top of public networks like Hedera HashGraph. And those applications could be to spread educational information. What we're really talking about is replicating a database really quickly across a network and sharing this information. So I think the dissemination of information in areas where those don't have access to it. Personally, I'm very excited about micropayments. HashGraph does micropayments native on the blockchain, and I think that's on our distributed ledger technology. And I think that's a really killer application, a really killer thing that's going to disrupt the way that publishers are compensated. Maybe they're charged. Maybe we as individuals are charged a penny or a fraction of a penny per page view. Maybe we are transacting with each other with these micro transactions. Perhaps, and this doesn't exist today, but perhaps as 5G connections become more prevalent, your cell phone could be a node on a network that's earning money like you see Bitcoin miners earning today. And I don't know if that's in 2 or 3 years, maybe that's more like 5 to 10, but that I see a future where that's possible and where your phone is that node on that network. And, there's a lot of mobile penetration in low income areas of South America and even Africa. So telling someone that they can make money on their phone at home, even if it was $1 or $2 per day, that's going to change a lot of people's lives. And I think that's really exciting. So I would say in terms of use case, to just sum it up, micropayments I think are going to be killer. Micropayments can do a whole lot of things. And I would say IoT applications where machines can communicate with other machines. Namely, if you look at nano devices, or if you look at switches that utility companies place in homes for meter reading, or if you look at smart meters or smart cities even. I think there's a lot of really groundbreaking applications there. So those are just some of them. In terms of social good, in terms of where I think the world really starts to become a better place is I think we have an opportunity here to create a ledger that lacks that doesn't have the volatility or the governance problems of the other networks, that has this governance body in place where we can actually start to fulfill on this vision of banking the unbanked. And I'd argue that no platform is better positioned to execute on that vision than Hedera HashGraph. For us to distribute wallets is just as trivial as it is for anyone else to distribute. However, our platform has the governance in place to protect against forking, to protect against infighting among core developers. It's got the capabilities of becoming this platform that could actually exist for hundreds of years, and we're certainly building it with that in mind.
Now, Jordan, I want to really understand where this company is going. Right now you're private. What's the next step for this company? And then I want to really gain your perspective on where fiat currencies that are simply created by these central banks with no basically with their own governance system, but with no regard for ramifications for the average person. How will that change with blockchain technology, with DLT, with HashGraph? What will the future be like in terms of currencies? You're probably getting approached by many sophisticated people that want to use the technology and are looking to take HashGraph in their own agenda. Have you met or have you been privy to any government and how they are looking to create a future payment system that is based on obviously government and not private systems that transacts among themselves?
Yeah. So to answer the first part of your question, Lior, today, up until March this year, up until the beginning of March, we were exclusively focused on behind the scenes on actually two things. One was building this enterprise traction 2015 until now, and then the what we've been working on since late last fall, so fall of 2017. We've been working on Hedera, and we announced Hedera publicly in March of 2018, this year, in New York City at a live launch event where we announced that we are going to release HashGraph as a public network called Hedera HashGraph to address the problems that I've just been talking about in the public marketplace. So we're about to go public. With that, you need a scarce resource to protect the security of the network. So we do have a token, a cryptocurrency that is used to create the incentive for people to have open consensus, to add their computers to the network and gossip about gossip, and also to protect the security of the network. So we do have this coin. The coin, this cryptocurrency, is used to pay for the services of the network. And those services are native microtransactions, they're long-term short-term storage through our distributed file store. And then we have smart contracts and Solidity. So those are the services you pay for with the crypto coin. So to answer your question, we're going from very private focus to public. We're addressing the public market. Hedera HashGraph is accessible to all to use and to build on top of. Now, of course, that comes with a restriction because in some jurisdictions, you have to comply with laws that require you to only raise money from accredited investors and that sort of group, which is a shame in that I think there's real utility for people that are not accredited, and we certainly want to make access to Hedera open for all. But we believe long term we'll be able to execute on that. Now, to answer the second part of your question, where are we going with this technology? How can we hold this or use this incredible breakthrough to be able to hold governments accountable. And I can tell you that we are already having very private conversations with central bankers and the people that actually print money. And I can't say where, but we do travel abroad quite a bit. But we are having these conversations with governments that are actually considering issuing cryptocurrency as a native sovereign currency, as a native fiat currency, and doing it on the ledger. Now, Lior, if that were actually to happen, that would give unprecedented insight to the citizens of a nation as to how much money their government is printing. And if we had that, I think you'd solve a lot of problems. I think part of the problem with the way these large governments operate today is not having transparency, one, into how much fiat, as you call it, or sovereign currency, some call it that as well, how much is printed or put into circulation, and then two, how it's being used. Where is that being spent? Do we agree with how that's being spent? And I think distributed ledger technology, I think these ledgers, and HashGraph included, have the ability to really disrupt that. Now, in a perfect world, I'd love for a sovereign currency, a sovereign state or sovereign currency to deploy one of those applications, a cryptocurrency application, on a public network like Hedera. Practically, I think that they'll stand up their own nodes and use the technology in the space to do it. But I see a future that's not too far off. And in fact, I'm going to call that within the next just few years, you'll start to see some very public proof of concepts of how this will function. And I would say within 5 years, I think you'll actually see a state, a sovereign state with a standing army, issue cryptocurrency as something that's tradable and holdable as fiat for their citizens.
Is that dangerous, in your opinion, to have only a digital version of your wealth and basically no cash equivalent of your cash of your currency?
Yeah, so I would say that with the existing technology in the market today, I would say yes, because most of what's in the market is probabilistic or non-deterministic. What I mean by that is with every confirmation in a proof of work network, you become more certain that Lior has $10 and Jordan has $9, but you're never truly certain. You're never guaranteed that certainty. With the technology that's coming, namely HashGraph, and I think future iterations of it, you have these deterministic algorithms that I actually think it's safer than a lot of what we have in the marketplace today. You would want the government to be issuing public-private key pairs because you wouldn't trust any one provider for creating wallets. So technically, I think that we're getting closer to the point, and with HashGraph, I think we're there already where, yes, it will become possible to have complete security, asynchronous Byzantine fault-tolerant security in these distributed systems. Then that there's no ABFT system that's deployed in the marketplace today. HashGraph will be the first of that new genre to be deployed in later this year in the fall. So I'd say that's becoming easier. So I wouldn't say it's dangerous. I'd also say that there's already places where hard physical currency that you can touch and feel in your hands isn't really in circulation. If you go to Stockholm, Sweden, everyone uses a credit card. You can walk into most shops there, and most people don't even want to touch the cash. And that's the case in increasing number of places in the world. So I think this is the way the world's going. And Lior, I like to think of the world through my son's eyes. I have an 18-month-old kid at home. And when I look at the world through his eyes, I think he'll laugh when I tell him I used to go to the corner store right here in New York City and give him $1, and they give me these pennies, nickels, and dimes. He'll say, "Oh wow, you're so old, Dad." Right? Like think of it from his eyes when he's 18, 19, 20, when he's off to college. I really think he's going to be using some sort of cryptocurrency-like coin.
Interesting. Jordan, I want to ask you about future professions, future occupations for people. Many occupations will be obsolete with the advent of cryptocurrency and with the advent of HashGraph and everything that the world is going towards. What are some occupations that you deem as obsolete or that you think will be cut drastically in terms of the manpower needed, and where are new jobs going to come from?
Yeah, this is a great question, and the connection got a little unstable again on my end when you asked that, but I think I got the gist of it. So the occupations that will really become obsolete, there's so many repetitive tasks in a lot of the world's largest organizations. Anything that requires a lot of paperwork that's done manually right now, the issuing of you could even argue when you combine AI, machine learning, reinforcement learning, as it's now called, with these ledgers, some really crazy things are possible. I mean, even diagnosing an X-ray or a mammogram and being able to come to consensus on if someone has early signs of breast cancer. A lot of these things are going to be automated, done by computers. Which profession, there's a lot of professions today that are still, there's a lot of manual computation or manual input. The one I'm thinking of the most right now, just because I just paid taxes here in the United States. Every year, this time of year, everyone's to file their taxes by this April 15th, April 17th date. And accounting is still so manual in a lot of these organizations. I think a lot of that, once you have micropayments and once you have these ledgers are actual ledgers, like an accounting ledger, once you start to have the proper inputs, if the world were to fully move to these cryptocurrencies, you're going to see all of this track on these ledgers where we have these immutable or even controlled mutable ledgers where all movement of money will be tracked, and you're really going to replace a lot of people's time and a lot of people's work that are keeping track of those. Paying taxes could be as easy as a click of a button if you just entered your wallet, and though that wallet could probably tell you in the future, oh well, this is what you owe depending on what jurisdiction you spent most of your time in. So I see that space. Insurance, a lot of paperwork, a lot of claims. I think a lot of the insurance space is going to be disrupted and put on ledgers. A lot of credentialing or any sort of credential management will be put on these ledgers. Where do I see a lot of new jobs being created? I see that there's a massive need for people to write smart contracts. The way smart contracts are being used, Lior, is to do IOs, to write these complex agreements that are turned into software for how two parties are going to transact with each other, and then basically dictate an atomic swap, right? You put your house on the ledger and I put my Bitcoin on the ledger, and then it swaps, right? That would be a smart contract. I think you're going to need a lot of people to write those and support those. Now, of course, you could also say that, well, we'll just write a program that can do that quickly too. But I still think what you can't replace is the trust of a human, and I still think you'll have humans part of that process that help to get you still have humans bringing value, moving value onto these ledgers. So, much like if you remember back in the .com days, the 90s, everyone was starting these companies that are like, hey, we're going to digitize your business. Let us make a website for your business, a landing page for your business. I think you're going to have a lot of people, this whole cottage economy of people that form that help move people and assets and wealth onto ledgers. So I see a lot of jobs. I see a lot of entrepreneurs creating businesses to help existing companies navigate this new space. One, get educated on blockchain, distributed ledger technology. What can you do with something like HashGraph? So a lot of consultants, a lot of development companies like system integrators, helping companies learn how to build code and deploy on these public networks, build dApps, distributed applications. And I see a lot of jobs being created in that space. In fact, I have a buddy who just quit a huge law firm in Midtown Manhattan and just became a blockchain lawyer at a startup in the space. So anything is possible And everyone's calling themselves these crypto capitalists or these blockchain or DLT experts. But I truthfully, I love that. I think that's a great sign of a healthy ecosystem. And there's a lot of good people out there that are helping to build the space. So I think that's going to create a lot of jobs for many years to come.
Jordan, do you think that the stock market, the bonds market, all the big currency markets, everything like that will be 24/7 and just running without stop? All the markets will be just running all the time?
I would love that, so that these financial services or these public market traders would know what these new crypto traders are feeling. So I have a lot of buddies that have done very well. I've gotten very close to the folks over at Q Capital. You have these kids, frankly, they're young guys in their early 20s, right out of Columbia, and they built this quant fund called Q Capital. Everyone should go look at it. They have this incredible story where they turned $200,000 into $25 million, arbitraging international markets, the Korean markets against the American markets. I mean, these guys are incredible. I don't know when they sleep though. So, personally, I'd love to see that, Lior. I'd love to see those bond markets and those other, commodities markets become 24/7. I think you'll have the capabilities to have that, but I think you won't see that because the regulators want to sleep and probably the professional traders want to sleep as well. But these crypto markets are certainly that way. I guess the only catch on that would be if one of these crypto exchanges or you start to see, and I'll tell you, there's a bunch of projects in the space. I was just fortunate enough to meet with the Harbor team out in San Francisco, and I know the folks over at Polymath really well. They're securitizing actual assets. So if you start to see commodities securitized or real estate investment trusts that are crypto securitized, there's rumors of a big hotel here in Manhattan that's going to tokenize and sell a third of the holdings in that hotel as a crypto coin. If that starts to happen and there's a market maker that builds a market around it and the regulators are okay with it, then I think, yes, you will see that. But I think it's really going to come down to what the regulators and the big funds in the space want to see.
Now, obviously, with wrapping up this interview, I need to ask you the mother of all questions. Is there any chance in your mind that cryptocurrencies or any of this progress will be stopped by governments and outlawed, or anything that has to do with what we saw with regards to banning or shutting down? Is this the direction that governments want to go, or do they try to adapt? And the same thing goes for the banking industry and all the other industries that are going to be very much disrupted from what's going on.
Yeah, I can't see it happening. I'm not a regulator. I've had the good fortune of meeting with many of them and just having off-record conversations at conferences and meetings. But what I can tell you and what I suspect will happen is that, yes, we'll see increased regulation in the space, but that's because the regulators are there to, at the end of the day, protect against predatory projects that have taken advantage of people. Unfortunately, there are some bad seeds in our industry that are giving the space a bad name. And unfortunately, there's some celebrity endorsements of some pretty bad projects out there that are frankly just awful, and there's no real technology behind. I think the regulators are going to get it right. I take a forever optimistic view of the space. You're starting to see some real institutional players, some major institutional funds coming into the space, including the Rockefeller estate and the Rockefeller fund. And there's rumors that George Soros, the billionaire investor, the guy who broke the British pound, that he's getting involved in the space now. So I think that as you start to see more of this, the regulators understand that, one, it's important that they educate themselves properly on it. But what I see here in the United States is I see real patience and a real effort on their part to get it right. And they don't want to squander the growth and innovation that this new, I don't know, call it a gold rush or call it this new period of time that we're living in. They don't want to squander the growth of this new space. And I actually believe that they do have good intentions in mind. And that's just because I've talked to a few of them and I listen attentively when they talk or issue a statement. So here in the United States, I think that, while we're not the most forward thinking in terms of it, and other countries certainly beat us to the punch, I think that it will become a great ecosystem and a great environment to start a distributed ledger project like HashGraph. We're registered here in the United States, and we comply with American law. I also see really forward-thinking countries over in Europe, in Estonia and Lithuania. I think that Scandinavia is very forward-thinking with a lot of this. In Sweden, I think that Israel in the Middle East is one of the most forward-thinking. We're doing a meetup just this weekend in Tel Aviv, and I think the Israeli government's going to get this right. And I also think over in Asia, I think you're already seeing Hong Kong and Singapore being very forward-thinking and having departments of their government building stuff here. So no, I can't see it, Lior. I honestly can't see it going away. I think the space is here to stay. The technology is going to change everything. Practically where it's going to start, I think it's just started with money. I think it's just started with the softwareization of some crypto asset, some cryptocurrency that can then be used to do a whole lot of other things like micropayments, distributed file storage, smart contracts, etc. But it's going to be an exciting next couple of years for sure.
Jordan, where can people see more from what you're doing? What's your website and your social media, etc.? I know you and I are going to meet up personally in New York with my partner Kenneth Amaduri from CrushTheStreet.com to do a live video interview in late May. But before that, if people want to check out more of what's going on, where can they go right now?
Yeah, so you should go to HashGraph.com and follow HashGraph over on Twitter. You can, we're really active on Twitter. You can join our Telegram community as well. The link to that's on HashGraph.com. We have more than 25,000 people that are in our Telegram community, which is great. If you're a developer and you're listening, you can go to Discord, so hashgraph.com/Discord, where you can join the developer community. More than 3,000 developers there building some really cool stuff on the technology. And I'm also on Twitter, Jordan Fried, last name spelled Fried. Follow me on Twitter, and would love to exchange tweets. And Lior, I can't wait to meet with you and your partner in New York and continue the conversation. I love the work you guys are doing and helping to grow the ecosystem.
Jordan Fried, thank you very much.
Thanks, Lior.